Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is going to be a little bit more detailed webinar than we've given in the past on HERSH2O, addressing a lot of the questions that we've had come up over the last year or so from raters that are doing HERSH2O ratings. We're trying to address many of those questions and some of the challenges that raters have had with HERSH2O. I'm going to be joined today. This is Ryan Mears with ResNet. I'll be joined by Paulette McGee, ResNet's program manager, and Michael Matthews, ResNet's programs engagement specialist. We'll go through first indoor, some of the indoor things that have popped up in terms of questions and challenges, and then we'll address outdoor, which has been I think the bigger challenge and learning curve for most raters. And then I'll wrap up with an overview of the new version of Standard 850, as well as a little sneak peek on multifamily HERSH2O ratings, with a particular focus on multifamily outdoor calculations, which will be different than for single family. If you have any questions as we go through the webinar, please enter them in the questions tab on the GoToWebinar toolbar. I'll also note that in the handouts tab on the webinar toolbar, you will see the current version of the HERSH2O implementation guidelines, so you can download those from there. And I point that out because those guidelines do include the sampling provisions for HERSH2O. So if you've had questions on that, those what used to be just sampling guidelines are now included specifically in the implementation guidelines. So you can see the language there, and that is sampling for both multifamily, which just refers back to the ResNet HERS standard for sampling of multifamily. And then there are specific provisions in there for HERSH2O sampling for single family homes. So with that, I welcome you, and I'm going to hand it over now to Paulette McGee, who will get us started.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm trying to move the slide forward, but it's not. So Ryan, you might have to do it. Thank you.
Okay, there we go.
Anyway, we're really happy to announce that the HERSH2O program has been a great success. We nationally launched in 2021, and we have over 20,000 ratings so far. We have 360 certified raters and 27 accredited providers, and we're up 11% in 2025 compared to the 2024. Next slide. So the HERSH2O is based on the ANSI ResNet ICC 850, was first published in 2020 and again in 2025. So providers can be accredited, available to all rating providers. Software is, you can utilize the spreadsheet temporarily. There is a cutoff date on that, or Ecotrope, and all certifications have to be submitted to the ResNet registry. So the scope is 1 and 2 family dwellings, which also includes townhomes in the 2020 standard. And then we have the 2025 standard, which includes the same scope as HERS. Now, raters and RFIs can be certified to do the HERSH2O ratings after they complete a 3-hour online training. And all inspections need to be done at the final. Next slide. So the components of a water rating is we have to consider the house size, the geographic location, number of bedrooms, lot and landscape sizes, hot water distribution layout, and hot water pipe insulation. Also, the shower heads, kitchen faucets, lavatory faucets, clothes washer, toilet flush volume, water softener, dishwasher, excess pressure, and irrigation, pool or spas are also considered in the water rating. So when you're doing your indoor inspections, these are what you're going to be looking for. So you're always going to check for leaks throughout the house, and that is an absolute water sense requirement. There's also the static pressure test, which is water sense requirement, but it can also be used as an input for HERSH2O. So fixture flow rates, toilet flush volume, appliance information, hot water pipe length, and hot water pipe insulation are all considered. So for toilets, the average flush volume of all toilets are considered. You have to identify whether they're a single flush or a dual flush, which will reduce the average. And you do need to check your manufacturer's specifications. Water sense equals 1.28 gallons per flush or less. Now there's two options that you have for faucets and shower heads. You record the flow rate printed on the fixture, or you find it in the manufacturer specifications. You can conduct a flow rate test for lavatory faucets. Spreadsheet allows for entry of standard or low flow, which low flow equals 1.5 gallons per minute or less. Now on the spreadsheet, we put the spreadsheet inputs and Ecotrope side by side so you could compare them. And you have to be able to input the accurate information. So single flush volume is gallons per flush, dual flush volume is gallons per flush, and you input those on the spreadsheet. You identify the number of toilets and the single flush volume. And then as you go down, there's a drop box which you can click onto and select if it's low flow. So spreadsheet inputs. So rows 49 and 50 are required, and you need to enter rows 51 and 52, or you go to the label and you input 54 through 59 with the information. Then okay. So now clothes washers are not required for a rating, and I know a lot of builders do not automatically put in a clothes washer. So that can be confusing. So when there is no clothes washer, you have to reference the home values. So the capacity, you enter 3.0 when clothes washers are not installed. And for the water factor, you need to enter 11.4 when the clothes washer is not installed. Now, not installing the clothes washer isn't going to increase the HERSH2O score, but it does leave the potential water savings on the table. So encouraging our builders to put in clothes washers might be a good thing. Now on the spreadsheet, if you're not putting it in, you enter NA for rows 61 and 62. When no washer is installed, you enter rows 63 or 64, or rows 66 72. When no clothes washer is installed, enter default values from column F. And then on Ecotrope, you can see that if you are installing, you need to put the make, the model, the integrated water factor, and if it is an Energy Star property, and if it's a front load. And again, you have a drop-down box which you can, click the accurate information.
All right, thanks, Paulette. Next up, we're going to discuss the outdoor inspections and testing protocols and our methods. And Ryan, I think I'm able to advance. So let's see, yeah. So what we're looking for, and this may feel like you're a fish out of water because most of you are used to being inside, not necessarily looking at irrigation and landscaping values. But what we're looking at here is landscape design, and you're determining through that the irrigated area. We're going to address the irrigation controllers, determining if there's a swimming pool and or a spa. And then there is an option to determine the irrigation flow rate. All right, so the key components of an irrigation system, and what we're looking at up here is the controller. A lot of times that controller is going to be in either a garage or a utility room. It does require power, so it's going to be near or next to an area where there's electricity and can be plugged in. So again, you're going to find that in some place that's out of the weather because it is a piece of electronics, typically not going to be on the outside of the home, but it is going to be somewhere interior out of the weather where you can plug that in. And what that does is shows you the number of zones that you've got and allows you to toggle through that. And then you're going to determine if it's a smart controller. And we'll elaborate a little bit on that in a moment. So the emitters, and I've got a better slide next that's going to give you a little more indication of what you're looking at and able to identify. But those are either above ground, below ground, drip, pop up, and or rotating. Then your backflow device. Now I've never seen one like that is depicted here, but I assume this is in an area that doesn't have heavy freeze. A lot of times you're going to see that backflow device in a control box, and what that does is when the system is no longer pressurized and sending water to the planting areas, it keeps that water from sucking any chemicals, any pesticides, lawn care items back into the system and allowing it to get into your potable water. So it's good for avoiding that. But then within that control box, you're going to be able to identify how many valves are in there. So if you are a little bit familiar with irrigation systems, you can pop that lid, and if you have counted a few different zones and then you reference inside that box and you see 8 zones and you haven't identified all of those, it's just another indicator to either raise your hand, ask the builder. If you get lucky and the irrigation system is being installed while you're there and everything's flagged, it might be a little bit easier. But if you don't have that, then reach out to that builder and make sure that you're covering all the ground that needs to be taking a look at there. So again, here's some of the examples of what you're looking at in the wild. The drip irrigation, very efficient method of watering. Essentially, you've got tubing. A lot of times that's going to get buried under mulch to, again, retain some of that water. And then you might see some of the emitters that kind of come up. But that essentially is putting water right at the root system of the plants. Like I said, very efficient, way less evaporation. Subsurface drip irrigation, I've never seen it, but I do know that in my area there are some of the soccer fields that the kids are playing on these days that are watered with that. Essentially, they're putting down the drip irrigation underneath and then laying the sod on top of it to avoid what you see in the right here, those pop-ups. Those could be a real ankle buster if you're putting it into a sports field. But essentially the one on the top here, that one does pop up, and then it's kind of a static spray. You can see that it's designed to kind of get into that nice little niche rectangle there, and you do see some of that water that's flowing onto the hardscape there. And the one below that will actually be on a rotary head that's spinning, and it allows you to shorten it, fan out, and then decide the distance that water is going to throw. But these are not as water efficient because of the opportunity. Once that air it meets the water, there could be some evaporation that's going to take place there. All right, advance. There we go. All right, so what we've got here, this is a very simple plat for us to work with. I've got two different examples of this, determining our irrigated area. So what we're looking at here is just a nice, pretty rectangle plan and everything that's going to swoop in here. So this is the perimeter of our property. Then we've got our pad footprint. So that's where the house is on the plat there. So anything that is foundation, slab, that's what this gray area is here. And we're going to bring in our front area. So that's anything that's including our hardscape, our landscaping that is going to be irrigated, your driveway, sidewalk, any retaining walls, things like that are going to be included in this front area. So that's the wholesale, everything that's what you determine where the front area is. And then we've got our back area here, same thing. It's just everything that's in the back that includes any of the area back there. And then this, it's a little globulous, you can see. So what this is broken down to is anything that you're expecting to be irrigated. It's either planting beds, it can be the entire swath of lawn, but this is just kind of broken down into so you can get your mind around where you're going to measure. So when you're looking at any portion of the lot that is expected to be irrigated, like I said, with those pop-up emitters, you're not just going to measure and stop there, because there is a throw that water has. So, determining, and sometimes you're going to have to estimate that, but typically where they're placed, they're going to have a radius or, kind of a flat line where they are designed to reach. And a lot of times they'll be spaced so that they have a little bit of an overlap. So when you find that last one in the row, go ahead and add a few extra, maybe 10, 12 feet on the outside of that radius to make sure that you're as accurate as possible. All right, so here's a little different design plat. We've got, something you would see maybe at the end of a cul-de-sac, a little less rectangular, a little more complicated to determine. And this is our input areas. You've got your landscape design up top here. This is our spreadsheet that's being phased out, but then our ecotrope inputs that are going to be hopefully active by July. Excuse me. Sorry, I had to clear my throat there. All right, so this on the right side, you see our legend here. What we're going to go with is pink is going to be our entire lot area. So that pink is the perimeter outside, and it's going to cover the entire perimeter of our, the entire area of our yard. And then we've got in black, we've got the footprint of the home. And then again, the yellow is the front area, which does again include everything that's hardscaped, plants, lawn, sidewalks, retaining walls. And then the back area, and this does take a little bit of thought and conversation. If you know your builders well enough, whether they leave it up to the homeowner to do the back. Sometimes they just come and throw straw down and seed it to keep the soil in place. But if it is a little more custom design, that backyard may be fully landscaped, lawn and plantings included in the house package. So we'll go over the fields and where you enter that and how you determine that as we go forward. All right, so what we've determined here is that our area of the entire lot is 21,105 square feet. And please don't do the math for me here, because this is just for the sake of the process here. But we're going to enter it in this top line, the lot area. So that's in our entire lot area, and 21,105 square feet goes into that field. Next up, we've got the footprint of the home, which I've determined to be about 2,664 square feet. That's going to go in the second field here. And what you're going to notice about that is that 2,664 square feet is less than the lot area. So the lot area should never equal the pad footprint. That's the entire yard versus the size of the home. So that's where we're we're getting that major difference there. And next up, we've got our front area, which I measured out to be around 6,686 square feet. That's going to go into the front area field here. Again, that's everything included. Now, what we're going to subtract here, you can see I kind of blanked out the driveway. That was really the only hardscape item here, but we're assuming now that this builder is going to put in grass or lawn of some sort, and it's going to be irrigated in everywhere that's either hashed or colored in yellow. And where I am in the southeast, and a lot of places similar to where we are, builders typically are putting sod in entire front yard. They'll have their required plantings that they've got to put around the foundation, and maybe drop a tree or two that'll take about 40 years before it casts any real shade. But that's where we're looking at the removing the hardscaping, and the more lawn that's irrigated, it's going to lead to a higher HERSH2O score. So keep that in mind as you discuss with the builders. Push them towards larger planting beds, sometimes a little more xeriscaping rather than just a huge swath of lawn if they're having trouble hitting the HERSH2O numbers that they're looking for. So once I've subtracted out that hardscape, we come up with about 6,000 square feet. That's going to drop into this field here. And then next, with the back area, we are looking at, again, we're going to assume here that the builder is not finishing the backyard and leaving it up to the homeowner. So, like I said, they may throw some wheat straw down or hay, and then handfuls of seed to lock the soil in place if possible. But that's going to enter this field here on the right. So if they are not finishing the backyard, you're going to input 0. Now, in the case where there's 0 lot line and there is no actual backyard, you're going to type in 0.001. That's just it will still show once you enter that, it'll still show a 0 in that field, but that 0.001 allows the program to recognize and say, okay, you put in there that there's not going to be a backyard, you identified that, it just allows the calculations to be a little more accurate there. All right, so assuming that the entire backyard is irrigated, we've come up with 3,960 square feet here. We're going to enter that in here, and you can see that the calculation is automatically done down in this 9,960 square feet. So that's our overall irrigated area for this property. So back to our controllers. Once we have identified where the controller is, you want to identify if it is a Wi-Fi enabled controller, a smart device that works through weather patterns. A lot of times these smartest ones with the Wi-Fi module installed will actually track your weather patterns and trigger if there's a schedule. If it rains during that schedule, depending on the amount that was forecast, that controller will actually keep the irrigation system from coming on. I'm sure anybody who's seen an irrigation system running in the rain, if you have the same feeling in your gut than I do, you understand it's a nice thing to have these sensors. Otherwise, you're just pouring potable water down the drain post rain, and the plants aren't really benefiting any additional from that. So again, some of these fields are optional. They're all optional, but you must select yes or no. They do not have to have any of these. They don't have to have a pool or a spa, but you just want to make sure as you go through that you are checking yes or no if any of these things do or do not exist. And then the Ricky is an optional field here at the bottom. You're essentially testing the irrigation flow rates, but that is not required. You can have a professional irrigation audit, and then that's another route to get a little more accurate on this, but none of those are required. They just possibly might help the HERS H2O score drop down a little bit more. And there is an inspection guidance document through Ricky for those testing instructions, and we can send out a link for that if you need it. All right, so what if the builder is only landscaping in the front yard? We discussed that. Either there's no backyard or they are not going to touch it. The front yard must be landscaped to complete a HERS H2O rating. So in the picture in the example here, that's a lot of xeriscaping, but there is some planting there. So if you walk up and there is no irrigation system installed because it's fully xeriscaped and they're not using any irrigation, then you're not going to be able to complete based on section 5.2 of the standard 850 requirements. So typically the presence of or absence of an irrigation system is based on that front yard. So that's where you're going to take a look and start looking for that irrigation system. Now, the impact of indoor versus outdoor use is a little different as you are moving around the country. And for those of you who are in cold, wet climates, you're actually going to be able to see a better HERS H2O score based on interior fixtures because there's not as much water use in the outside. But these hot, dry climates that do require a lot more intensive water use to keep those plants alive, that's where you're going to see a bigger, a smaller impact from the inside. So you have to work really hard with those builders sometimes to get them to adopt xeriscaping. And if they're trying to put a golf course in the backyard in a house in Arizona and it's going to be irrigated, their HERS H2O score is going to probably just not be all that attractive based on that. And here's a little chart describing what I just said there. So in Duluth, Minnesota, what you've got for annual water usage is about 60,000 gallons. Versus Phoenix, Arizona, you got 140,000 gallons. And your indoor water usage there in Duluth is around 80%, versus in Phoenix, you're only looking about a third because the other 2/3 is being used to keep those plants alive. So your water savings from installing WaterSense labeled plumbing fixtures in Duluth is going to be a higher percentage versus Arizona, where it's only 4%. So the approach is to achieve that 30% reduction. In Duluth, you're going to be able to account for that in both indoor and outdoor improvements, but in a location like Arizona, you're going to have to make big strides and make substantial outdoor improvements to reach that 30% reduction.
All right, thanks, Michael. I'm going to do just a brief overview on WaterSense and how HERS H2O relates to that, and then I'll get into more detail on some of the new standard and multifamily as well. So for WaterSense labeled homes, believe it or not, we just last year still had some questions on version 1, which was sunset 4 years ago now. So version 1, which was many raters are familiar with it still, it was a prescriptive based labeling option. Version 2, which we're under now, is a performance based approach where you can use a HERS H2O for home certification. You do have to get a score of 70 or less to qualify for WaterSense. There's also a few mandatory items, and Paulette mentioned this at the beginning, that you do have to install WaterSense labeled fixtures. That includes toilets, shower heads, and your bathroom faucets. And you do have to check for leaks throughout the home during the inspection. The certificates that you see here on the right side of your screen are generated through the ResNet registry. They can also be They're also generated through Ecotrope once the rating gets submitted to the ResNet registry. And if you're using the spreadsheet, these certificates are going to be emailed to the email that is listed as the rater email on the spreadsheet. And if you're using Ecotrope, they'll be generated as you normally would expect a home energy rating certificate to be generated through Ecotrope. I want to cover a few areas where builders are struggling to achieve water sense, and one of them is large irrigated areas. As Michael was saying, this is primarily an issue that exists outside of the Southwest. There are very strict requirements in the Southwest as well as California on outdoor water use. And one of the things that we see happening with builders in other parts from Texas to the East Coast and up into the Midwest and the Northeast, the problem is that the standard practice is to essentially put turf grass anywhere that there's not hardscaping. And that leads to, and then in turn, they also irrigate that as well. So you have a very large irrigated area, which really hurts the HERS score. So reducing the irrigated area is one way to drive down your HERS H2O score. Using drought tolerant plants that don't require much, if any, irrigation is another option. And also non-grass surfaces. Now this is more accepted in places like Arizona and Nevada, where you may see mulch or stone or in some cases artificial turf. One of the homes that was part of a demonstration during the ResNet conference had artificial turf in the backyard with very limited irrigation that was done through drip irrigation. And then placing turf grass in shaded areas also helps to reduce that the water intensity that's needed to keep that grass alive. And working with a landscape designer is certainly a good step for builders to figure out how they can reduce their outside water use. And then inefficient irrigation systems is another thing that we've seen pop up. So some of the ways to address that is using WaterSense labeled sprinkler bodies, also using drip irrigation for non-turf grass areas like shrubs and other plantings and trees, WaterSense labeled irrigation controllers or other kind of smart controllers. There's soil moisture based sensors, there's Wi-Fi weather connected smart controllers that are also a good option, and you'll get credit for that in the HERS H2O calculations. Also, you can have the irrigation system commissioned by a professional to get an additional credit. This is somewhat common in California, where they have pretty strict requirements, but outside of there, much less common. The use of WaterSense labeled fixtures is also a good way. It's required if the builder wants to achieve WaterSense. They do have to have a WaterSense labeled toilet, and all the shower heads as well as all the bathroom faucets have to be WaterSense labeled. But that is a good way to reduce usage. The other one is is inefficient appliances. So Energy Star labeled clothes washers and dishwashers, they'll not only give you credit on the HERS side, but also on HERS H2O. And I know that for the most part, if it's not standard practice for a builder to install a clothes washer, which we don't see commonly, it's unlikely that they're going to choose to install a clothes washer just to achieve WaterSense, but it is one way that they can help reduce their water usage. As Paulette mentioned, the clothes washer is not going to hurt it's not going to increase your HERS H2O score, but you lose a lot of water saving potential by leaving it at the reference home values for the calculations. Now I'm going to get into standard 850/2025. So this has been approved by ANSI. It was approved back in April of 2025. The final publication processes happening through ICC should be available very soon on the ICC website. A few changes I want to highlight here. This new standard adds multifamily home type. That's probably the biggest change, is that the 2020 version of the standard was limited to 1 and 2 family dwellings. Now we can start to do multifamily. There's also, it adds some fields for gray water when it's used for toilet flushing. And there are some revisions to the outdoor water use calculations that impact single family. The HERSH2O calculation spreadsheet is in development. As Michael mentioned, it is going to be phased out this year, and Ecotrope is aiming to support the new standard by July. You can see the screenshot on the bottom here where the gray water fields will be added in to the new version of the spreadsheet. It is still under development. We're hoping that we will have that out early summer. Now, for multifamily, as I had mentioned, there are some differences. As far as the indoor water inputs, they're all going to be the same as for single family. The calculations are a little bit different in terms of occupancy assumptions, but the inputs themselves on the indoor side are all going to be the same. There are some new fields that are going to be in the updated spreadsheet. This includes a sample set ID field that will apply to both multifamily and single family that uses sampling. There's also you'll see a drop down for the home type where you can select multifamily or single family. There's also an input for the number of units on the property. So this means that if there's 5 buildings on one lot, you would enter the total of all the units in those 5 buildings on that lot. And this is actually really important because it is going to impact your outdoor water calculations, and I'll show in a second how that's going to happen. So for the outdoor HERSH2O calculations, first of all, I want to point out that there's going to be a new on the spreadsheet, and I expect that Ecotrope will probably pick this up in their help tabs. There's going to be a new instructions tab in the spreadsheet that will provide guidance not only for multifamily, but also for some of the single family things that where we've seen issues over the last few years and areas where we get a lot of questions. So that instructions tab will help provide some additional guidance on the inputs in the spreadsheet. So when we're looking at a site plan for a multifamily property, just like single family, the lot area is going to be the entire lot that those buildings sit on. In doing the calculations, the inputs are actually going to be the same as for single family, but the way that you conduct the calculations is a little bit different. So for multifamily, you're actually going to sum the pad footprint for all of the buildings on the property. Then you're going to subtract that pad footprint area. You're going to subtract the pad footprint from the lot area and then cut that in half, and that's going to be entered in as your front area input. And then you will calculate the irrigated area and divide that number by 2. You're going to enter the result in the front irrigation area and the back irrigation area to give you essentially what is the irrigated area for that property. The important thing is you do want to, when calculating the irrigated area, just like single family, you want to make sure you remove sidewalks and in this case the parking lots and any other hard surfaces from that calculation. A few things I want to point out when it comes to multifamily outdoor calculations, and one is that the reference home irrigated area is always going to be the same as the rated home irrigated area. So you're not going to receive credit there for reducing the irrigated area. We did have a separate working group as part of SDC 1100 that tried to tackle the outdoor calculations for multifamily. And one of the recommendations that they came up with was to just, because of the variability in the types of multifamily properties, you can have an urban multifamily property that has almost no irrigated area and potentially none at all, to a more suburban property that may have large irrigated area. So we determined that in the recommendation from the work group was to keep the reference and rated home irrigated area the same. But there are still other ways to improve the HERS H2O score for outdoor use in multifamily. And one of those is for a professional irrigation audit, using a soil moisture or weather-based irrigation controller will also give you credit. And then finally, the overall irrigation flow rate using RICI. RICI is the Residential Irrigation Capacity Index. And as far as inputs, it is just the gallon per minute flow rate of all the irrigation zones for the property. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the importance of entering in the number of units on the entire property is that the total outdoor water use gets divided equally among all units that are on the same property. So that does, entering the correct number of units for the property does impact how the outdoor water use gets allocated among the number of units on the property. So that is important, and you'll see those new inputs once we complete the new version of the spreadsheet based on the 2025 version of Standard 850. And then finally, just a reminder, if you do have questions, we're going to be wrapping up here after this next couple of slides. If you do have any questions, please enter them in the questions tab on the GoToWebinar toolbar. For launching HERS H2O multifamily, the calculation spreadsheet is being updated. There will also have to be a WaterSense HCO review, so we will have to get the multifamily, what the target scores are going to be for WaterSense on the multifamily side, and that review is pending the completion of the calculation spreadsheet, so that WaterSense has a chance to analyze that and determine the target scores. That, as I mentioned earlier, we expect that multifamily HERS H2O ratings will likely be rolled out sometime early summer. And finally, I just want to give a plug for the ResNet conference. We'll be in San Antonio in just about 3 weeks from now, March 17th to the 20th. There are water sessions there. There's going to be lots of, there's an entire track on quality assurance for HERS ratings. And also want to mention that there's going to be a joint effort among several ResNet standard development committees, including 1100, 900, and 200, to work on more specific quality assurance requirements for HERS H2O ratings, with the goal eventually being that those would get included in the new QA app. So with that, I'll take a look at some of the questions that have come in. All right. Okay, great. We got a few questions here. Can you share strategies to achieve a passing rating in areas where HOAs require irrigated St. Augustine grass in both the front and backyards? That is a difficult one. We have we've seen many HOAs that are going the opposite direction. It depends on which part of the country you're in, where they're not allowing any turf grass to be installed in the front yard, for example. But it will be difficult if the HOA requires that there be a specific grass type, and that it be in both the front and backyards, and that it has to be irrigated. It will be difficult to achieve WaterSense with that strategy. And that's just because the HERS H2O score is always going to perform best when you have a larger lot area in comparison to the amount of area that's being irrigated. Drip irrigation that Michael showed, the subsurface drip irrigation may be a strategy to get there. Not entirely sure. I haven't looked at that yet. It may be an option, some type of a subsurface. Otherwise, your best options are going to be to ensure that you're using a smart controller, and that if it's a pop-up type above ground irrigation sprinkler body, you're going to want to ensure that it's a water sense labeled, and that it's the most efficient ones that you can get. Based on that, if it is a very efficient watering strategy, then you would be able to use the Ricky potentially to reduce that score, assuming that the irrigation flow rate is going to be better than the reference home flow rate. So that's about the only options. But those are the types of situations that have found it difficult to achieve water sense, especially on the outdoor side. All right, next question. Is there any plan to introduce a program for the Southeast where we can have similar recognition for the house efficiency without being penalized for required irrigated areas? So a couple of things on this. One of them is that we have considered an indoor only option for HERS H2O certification, and that I will be presenting a little bit about that actually at the ResNet conference. But we have looked at that. There's nothing else specifically in the works for that, but what we found in the Southeast, and there's been some builders that have looked specifically in North Carolina and in Florida with analyzing how their homes would perform on HERS H2O, and what they have found in working with raters in those two states is that the practice of using sod essentially everywhere, but where there's hardscaping, is really what's killing their scores. So I think that's the biggest takeaway that we've had for that. All right, let me take a look at the next one. All right, looks like somebody's having an issue submitting through Ecotrope. I will follow up with you. I'll follow up with you on that, on the similar. I may need to get some more information on that. Another question is about water softeners. So water softeners are, we didn't include it in this presentation because it's not a common thing that we see where builders are actually installing a water softener. So it's typically not going to be included in the rating. Builders will often rough in for a water softener to be installed, but then the homeowner has to install it. They are included in the rating itself if there is one present, but otherwise we haven't seen it commonly where the builder's actually installing it. All right. The other common question we get is which Michael addressed a little bit, is what if the builder isn't finishing the backyard? So basically what happens there is that you include the front yard. You can also include the side yards as part of that. That's typically going to be beneficial for your HERS H2O rating, because the larger the front area is in proportion to the irrigated area, the better the home is going to perform. And we have analyzed a lot of homes similar to the first one that Michael showed, which the lot was basically a rectangle. The side yards are maybe 5 to 10 feet wide, and typically there's not going to be any grass or vegetation. Often it will be mulch or stone that is put on those side yards, so there's nothing there to be irrigated. And in those instances, it makes sense to include the entire side yard as part of your front area. And then what the calculations do is assume that the backyard is set to the reference area. So essentially the entire back area is being irrigated at the reference home level. So that's really the assumption that is made if your builder is not finishing out the backyard. Now, if the builder's not finishing the front yard, the standard requires that the front yard be completed. We have run into this in Utah where the builders don't, essentially they don't do any landscaping at all, back or front. And in those instances, we have approved a couple of exceptions where the HOA has covenants, for example, that do not allow any turf grass to be installed in the front yard. And they also have very specific requirements for the type of irrigation controller and the type of irrigation system that can be installed. So there's few exceptions to that, and those have to be done on a case-by-case basis based on the community's HOA requirements. Let me see if we've had any more questions come through. Yep. Can you produce a HERS H2O rating on homes served by well water system? Yeah. So the HERS H2O is agnostic as to the source of the water. It simply is ensuring that that the water that is being used, regardless of where it comes from, is being used efficiently. So HERS H2O ratings can be done on well water systems as well. Similar, it kind of in a similar vein is that there's the current standards for 850, both the 2020 and 2025 version do not include any rainwater offsets in there. The Standard Development Committee has been working on that for over a year now and trying to develop a section on alternative water sources. So that has not been completed yet. We did just get the gray water added in, and hopefully rainwater and potentially other water sources will be included in the next version. Another question. Oh, okay. Looks like I may have just addressed some of that. If an outdoor area uses rainwater from a cistern, will this be considered in the rating? So currently, no, it's actually not considered in the rating. So it would eventually there will be a rainwater section in the standard that will address those types of situations, but it's not currently addressed. All right, it looks like that is all the questions. Let me, just in case you don't have our contact information, this is for me, Paulette, and Michael. If you do have any questions that pop up, feel free to reach out to one of us. If you're interested in more information on HERS H2O or anything else related to water sense label for homes, please reach out. Otherwise, I want to say thank you for your time, and hopefully we'll see you at the ResNet conference. Have a good day.